He's so cute. I'm just really interested. If you've read it, what did you think? Are you going to read it if you've not read it yet? Also, this is the first... I've tried to say as much about this book as I can without actually spoiling the plot for people.
Hello, welcome to Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. I'm Scott.
And I'm Nelle.
And today we're going to do a review of The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern.
That's this one. We read this for our book club, so we haven't had our book club discussion yet.
That is next weekend.
That's next weekend. So we're just sort of doing a bit of a pre-discussion discussion.
And what we've done with this, we've had a very brief discussion of each other's thoughts of this book, but we haven't actually done an in-depth discussion. Normally we discuss it a bit before we did a review, and now this is totally off the cuff, so our reactions are genuine.
Yeah, you don't normally get to see our first impressions to each other, so this is an experiment. It might end up in an all-out brawl.
Yeah, so you've got some things you want to say, Nell, and I don't know what they are, so...
I've got some notes because we're reading this for book club, so I took notes.
Ooh.
So one of the first things that I noticed is a sort of returning to the idea of your level of intimacy with art impacting the way you view that art and your experience of that art. So a couple of quotes on page 68. In truth, Chandresh prefers not to know all the ingredients, not to understand each technique. He claims such ignorance gives each dish life, makes it more than the sum of its parts. Remarked one guest when the topic arose, you prefer not to see the gears of the clock as to better tell the time. There's actually that particular theme repeats a few times. I've got half a dozen quotes that repeat on that theme throughout the book. And I thought that was a really interesting thing to keep coming back to.
That ignorance makes the art better.
Well, I think particularly with magic, like sleight of hand, that making you look in the other direction improves your enjoyment of the trick. That not understanding the makeup of something.
One of the joys I get from watching magic, and I quite like watching magic tricks, is not knowing how it's done and figuring out how it could have been done.
Yeah, but this is almost like intentionally not trying to figure that out. And I almost wonder if she's making a comment on literature and the picking apart of books
and how we shouldn't talk about the underlying themes.
Maybe.
So maybe we're
ruining the trick.
We're ruining the trick.
But I also felt like she was talking about that a lot, and she did it with the plot. She sort of, because it's so episodic, she was able to do this sort of cycle. I've actually drawn a little thing in my notes where she foreshadows something and then she distracts you by following another character or talking about other events, and then all of a sudden you're in the action that she's foreshadowed, and she sort of does this sleight of hand, like, look over here, and then over here something happens. And she did that repeatedly. She used that trick over and over again throughout the evolution of the story. And I thought it was interesting that was also one of the themes. And she's then used that device in the plot.
Used that trick. Well, I mean, I didn't feel like this... I didn't think that anything was particularly a surprise. I thought everything was pretty...
I definitely felt that she foreshadowed, but that I sort of knew what stuff was coming. There's certainly a death that I knew who was going to die, and well before it happened. But then all of a sudden it was happening, and I felt like she distracted from the lead up, like the logical progression of events was hidden from view a little bit. And then all of a sudden you're in the action. By
following Bailey when we should have been following Celia or something like that.
Yeah. That was a very misdirecty example there.
I actually can't my brain's not working. I'm like, who died in it? What was the death?
So the one thing we have actually spoken about before making this video is both of us felt that there was sort of a lack of urgency in the conflict in the plot. It's not that there's a lack of plot. Stuff happens. It just doesn't seem
I didn't know
life
what
and
I
death.
was rooting for. I suppose if you haven't read The Night Circus, what it essentially is there are two illusionists that can do real magic are in this circus. This circus is in circa 1900s, like turn of the century 1900s, and it travels around all through North America and Europe. And there's two illusionists that are in some sort of battle to determine who is the best illusionist. But the conflict between the two illusionists wasn't
urgent.
It wasn't urgent. And then there's other things happening, and you sort of don't even know whether these two illusionists are going to battle each other, whether they're going to battle the idea of this of the battle, or whether they're going to fall in love. And
it's really, without getting into spoiler territory, I really felt like their participation in the battle was reluctant, and that they didn't. It just wasn't. It wasn't dramatic, and I suspect what she was trying to do is avoid the idea of it being a good-evil battle, and she's definitely tried to create a battle situation without violence, but to take all the violence out of it also takes like the consequence of death out of it or injury. And
it's the ugly things that make the beautiful things pretty, and she's taken all the ugly things out and just left you with the pretty things.
I think that there are reasons for this. I think that this is I've got a little bit of a theory about what she's trying to do thematically, and it makes sense in that context, but what it does to the plot is actually make it a little bit less dramatic. And I think that it's very atmospheric, and everyone who reviews it says that it's very atmospheric, but maybe lacking a little bit of plot, and that maybe the characters are a little bit Whitey McWhiteson, which I think is also true.
Wait. There was definitely an Asian character in here.
Like one.
Oh, I mean, it's taking place in North America, where the author is probably from. I don't actually know where she's from.
But it's also it's like a magical circus, and how many times do we see it in Asia and South America? And like,
we don't.
No, not really.
But yeah, I think there is a conflict in modern writing of trying to represent all sorts of people, and then also trying to write from a position of knowledge. And if you don't know any Native American people, then you can't really put them in your book.
I understand what you're saying, but I do think that
maybe she should have gone out and met some Native Americans, or
I just think that there's a small lack of diversity, which creates a small blandness to the characters, a sameness.
There was definitely LGBT diversity in there. One of the characters was a lesbian. At least one of the characters was a lesbian in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but yes, race diversity, I didn't think there was a lot of. So we have a tendency to sort of justify why we didn't rate a book 5 stars, or we didn't find a book perfect, and not talk about the things that we like in a book. So what did you enjoy in this book now?
I loved all of it. I thought it was a really fun read. I ripped through it in the shortest time that I've read a book in a long time. It was a beautiful book. If I rated books, I would rate this very highly, but I don't do that because it's horrible. I have lots of notes about what I think is interesting.
You take notes in a really... That's like... I don't know.
You certainly can't read it because my
like,
handwriting is atrocious.
Look at that. Like arrows and like you've written in a circle, like a figure 8 even, because it intersects.
It's a little bit mind mappy. I would be happiest with like a massive piece of paper and lots of coloured markers so I could draw like a web, because I think the ideas in books are web-like.
Yes.
one of the things I talked about was bindings, so that there's definitely this central binding of the two characters, which is very pseudo-wedding-y, but there's bindings throughout the novel of not just people to each other, but also people to places and people to memories. And I think that she's trying to say something about the interconnectedness of our decision-making with our relationships and our history, and even like nostalgia. And I thought that was really interesting, how you can see the echoes of these sort of bindings throughout the book. You've got, obviously the central binding with the two illusionists, but then the twins that come up.
That are bound to each other.
And everyone is bound to this circus.
And even the fans, they have, what are they called, revers?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce that. And I would like to look up what the French word means, because I suspect it's a little bit of a jokey-jokerson.
I suspect there's a reference there that you're not getting because you don't speak French.
Yes.
If you know what rever is, leave it in the comments, please.
Hopefully I have looked it up at some point.
Well, I would like to ask, what do you think this book says about future determinism versus self-determinism? That's a really shit way of saying it. And the concept of free will versus what is bound to happen.
Yeah, I thought for something that used to timelines and bindings and that sort of thing, I didn't feel like she touched on fatedness a whole lot. I think she was really talking about how our connections with other human beings impact our decision making in the future.
Oh, I thought she did touch on.
Did you see? Interesting.
That's why I asked the question.
I like, for a sort of feminist interpretation, I was very much thinking about how women often choose their family over their career based on their interpersonal relationships and their relationships with their spouses and their expectations of society and all that sort of stuff. And I really felt like the weight of the expectation of their parents on the two illusionists, their parents, their instructors, I guess, the two illusionists felt to sort of follow a certain path, really was reminiscent of that sort of push for women in particular to follow a certain life path and create family and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, okay. Well, I found like Celia didn't have any relationships in the book at all, and Marco's relationships were broken.
That's really interesting, because I thought Celia had lots of relationships.
Sorry. I mean like significant other relationships.
Oh.
Celia had lots of friendships in the book.
Yes, she did. Yes, but she...
What we were talking about Celia's relationships and Marco's relationships, and how Celia didn't get romantically involved, but Marco did, but Marco's were broken and Celia avoided them because they were focusing on this jewel and the idea of career over family.
But also I think like Celia was more isolated by her parent.
Yeah, definitely.
She had less freedom and all that's like, I do definitely feel like there was a feminist thread to the difference between Celia's upbringing and Marco's upbringing.
And their upbringing being completely different. In Celia was raised by what you would have to say was quite a mean, authoritarian,
abusive man.
Yeah, and while Marco was still raised by an abusive man, because that's how the story has to roll.
Mainly
but much more liberal.
And neglect, like distant and absent.
Yes.
And they both didn't seem to carry a whole lot of traumatic damage, which is something I'm unused to seeing in books.
Also, she didn't really explore that hard.
No, she didn't, but I felt like everything was a little bit emblematic. Like I felt like it wasn't necessarily pushed through to the forefront of the plot, but more there as a symbol for...
Definitely think she skimmed on the themes. Like she never really delved into a lot of the things as much as somebody else who is somebody like Donna Tartt would have done, for example?
I feel like she was a questioner. Like I think often seriously thematic authors fall into one of two categories, and one sort of I mentally call them questioners. They sort of create like a juxtaposition of ideas and that ask a whole series of questions and allow the reader to explore those ideas on their own. And then the other is definitely presenting a point of view. And I think that Erin is a questioner. I think that she's just creating a space for you to think about how these things impact each other. And I definitely think that she was trying to talk about our interaction with other people and our relationships. And I definitely think there was also a concurrent theme of our interaction with art and our intimacy with art, which was interesting to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to change the topic completely, and I'm going to ask you to explain something in the book that I struggled to get, because I'm very struggling to remember this. But please explain the Shakespeare references.
I don't know what you mean, explain.
Well, Celia's dad was a rip-off of one of the characters.
In The Tempest, had the same name as...
Yes. And there was Shakespeare quotes at the start of sentences, chapters.
Start of chapters. I didn't actually explore that much in my little thought project when I did this. I would be interested to see what other people thought about the Shakespeare references. Were they all from The Tempest?
I don't think so, but I think they were predominantly from The Tempest. So what's the Tempest is a storm, and it's people getting lost on an island, and re-finding themselves. Is that what happens in The Tempest?
The Tempest is a play about magic, betrayal, love and forgiveness, set on an island somewhere near Italy, where Prospero, which is the name that is reused in the Night Circus, the one-time Duke of Milan, and his beautiful daughter Miranda live with a sprite called Ariel and a strange wild man called Caliban. So again, we're about Prospero and his daughter.
Again, it's what is it? Is it about magic? Well, yep. Tick. Betrayal, yep. Tick. Forgiveness, yep. On an island. Well, the circus is an island.
It's like a magical moving island.
Metaphorical island, but whatever. And what was the next bit? Somewhere near Italy. Well,
not so much.
There's a Duke of Milan. Okay, well, we're sort of...
So Prospero uses magic to conjure up a storm and torment the survivors of a shipwreck.
Well, the circus is conjured up by Prospero, and he torments the people in it.
So the backstory on the battle is Prospero is the student of another magician who has basically, I don't want to say fallen from grace, but him and his teacher have had a conflict at some point, and Prospero thinks that his methods are
better to Alexander's.
Are superior to his teachers, and this battle is supposed to be about proving whether it's right or not. And his teacher actually doesn't seem to give a toss about the battle and only really participates because Prospero keeps pushing it. But I do wonder if this is almost an allegory of an allegory in that sense. Like, are we talking about...
Sorry, I'm not following you to explain. A Christian fall from the heavens. Like, is this God and the devil and God and the devil? But I didn't really get that sense of good and evil. No, I don't think. I think that that's not what it is.
Yeah.
Personally.
Thought experiment.
Yeah, no, you should ask questions. All right. So, is there anything else in your book that you would like to talk about?
I thought it was interesting that there were lots of sets of pairs. I thought that all the relationships were sort of one-on-one.
Well, what about Bailey and the twins?
But Bailey's relationship was really with Poppet.
And Poppet had a relationship with Widget.
Yeah, and then you know, Celia had her relationship with Marco, obviously, but then she had the relationship with Frederick, and there was just sort of all these groupings of two, and I felt like that had to have a reason, and I didn't really understand why.
I think it's easier to write, it's easier to examine. When you have three people in a conversation or more, you have so many more possibilities, so it's sort of harder to control. What did you like the most about this book?
It was really fun to read. Everyone talks about how atmospheric it is, and it is atmospheric, but I didn't feel like the description was purely to create atmosphere. I felt like that it was all pointed, and I felt very led along, and it was really fun. It was fun to read.
Is that dog snoring?
He's so cute. I almost nostalgic, but for something new. Like it definitely was evocative to me. I think it was a very evocative book. What did you enjoy about it?
Well, this is going to be a weird thing. This is exactly the sort of book that I can't stand, that I find boring and I hate. And I didn't hate this book. So this is exactly the sort of book that I would steer clear from. Not that I knew that going into it.
And it was a book club pick, so you didn't have a choice anyway.
And it was my recommendation for the book club as well. Like, let's be fair. Like, I wanted to read this book.
So it was a booktube recommendation, is really what you're saying.
I looked for relatively current books that were popular to recommend, to see. The book club is new. I just wanted to see what people would go for, and I thought this one might be a popular one, so I put it in the ring as an experiment. But it is something that I did intend to read at some point. But it felt very Jane Austen-y to me. I know that's a really weird comparison, but it felt, and I don't really like Jane Austen. I feel Jane Austen is light on detail.
Are you trying to say that it felt feminine? Is that what you're trying to say when you say Jane Austen?
I don't like to say feminine. I think I definitely do think that this book is written more for the stereotype female or reader, but that is not what I'm really trying to get at. Oh. We have these little buttons that we put around the house for our dog. They say things and he can push them and ask for various things, and we are sitting down in front of them, and Nella's just...
I've just asked for a treat with my butt. If you're interested in teaching your dog to talk, Hunger for Words, Hunger the number 4 words on Instagram. She's a speech therapist who has taught her dog essentially to communicate with these buttons, and it's amazing. Her dog has, I think, nearly 50 words now. Our dog has about 6, so... and they're all things that he wants. I want a treat.
And they don't always mean what we think they mean. For example, water means go down the hallway so that I can jump on you and fill up my water. Sorry, getting back to the book. I found the book light on detail, light on conflict, and I find that with Jane Austen, and I know that people will hate me for saying that and
when
disagree.
When are you getting to the thing you liked?
But I enjoyed reading this book. I enjoyed this book despite all of those things. So this is... What I'm actually saying is, despite this being a book that I should have absolutely hated, I didn't absolutely hate it because and I don't know why.
Yeah, okay.
I don't know why. So it's something about this book was very easy to digest, easy to
I think the
follow.
writing is actually quite masterful.
Yeah, and if I had to work to get through this, like you have to with some of the older books, and I keep mentioning Jane Austen, but yeah, because it's in a different tongue.
Yes.
I don't think I would like this book as much. You know, if I
It
was...
hadn't been so easy to digest.
Yeah, if I was, say I was a native Spanish speaker and I could read English but it wasn't my first language, I'd probably hate this book.
Yeah.
But I didn't. So it was entertaining and I liked all of the characters even though I didn't really care about them.
That's really interesting.
I liked them all.
That you didn't care about them and that you liked them. I thought the characters were definitely secondary to the circus. I think this is one of those books that uses place as a character.
Yeah, I don't like that.
Yeah, and I do. I think it can be great. I definitely like the level of imagery used in a book like this, and that's high on my list of reasons why I liked it. I thought the plot was a little bit disappointing. Is my downside, but I don't think that actually detracted from my enjoyment of the book. I suspected that the ending was going to be a bit anticlimactic the whole way through, and I didn't give a toss.
Okay. Well, yeah, I have to say I found this book a bit meh, but I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. You don't do stars, but you enjoyed this book, yeah?
I did enjoy this book. I definitely... let's put it this way. Last month I read American Gods and it basically destroyed all books for me ever, and I didn't get through another book that month because I was in such a foul mood by that
by that horror.
By that book. I'm sorry, Neil Gaiman, but it's trash.
Poorly written trash.
No, I don't agree with you. So let's not get into that argument again. I read this book and immediately picked up another. It just rejuvenated my passion for the written word. It was very good.
So it's a safe book.
I definitely think it's an easy win. Like if you love to read and you want to have a pleasant experience, this will give you one.
So I would classify this book as a romantic fantasy.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. I'm not very, like, sort of romance books are not really my thing.
I quite like romance when it's not just romance.
Yes, and this definitely was not just romance, but that's probably part of my disillusionment with the plot, is that a lot of the plot was centered around the romance.
Sorry, now I shouldn't have spoken over to you. I was trying to quieten him.
That's fine.
He's just chomping on his bone. Sorry, you were saying that you found the romance secondary to the plot?
No, I was saying that I think that a lot of the plot was centered around the romance. Is probably why I found it less dramatic and a little bit anticlimactic, because that's just not my thing.
Yeah, well, if you haven't read this book, I would recommend it if you enjoyed. I've actually compared it to Jane Austen, and I think that's good. If you like Jane Austen, you will like this book.
I want to ask some questions. What did you think? Do you have any theories about the Shakespeare connection and The Tempest? What did you think about... That's a weird noise.
I don't know how that dog has managed to choke on a massive bone, but he has managed to choke on a massive bone. Come here, Brittany, be in the end.
He's so cute. I'm just really interested. If you've read it, what did you think? Are you going to read it? Have you not read it yet? Also, this is the first... I've tried to say as much about this book as I can without actually spoiling the plot for people. So let us know what you thought of this style of video and this style of idea exploration. If you're new, subscribe and tell us what you think in the comments.
Yeah. Well, that's been Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. We've been hijacked by our puppy because we're sitting on the floor trying a new angle to shoot from. Remember, ideas are more powerful. They're more powerful than magical circuses.
They're more powerful than bindings. They're more powerful than
That's the button.
They're more powerful than death matches.
Then Desmond. Dun dun dun. Thanks, Brent.